All right. Well, welcome to this episode of Coffee and Issues. I'm Carol Bernard, CEO and co-founder of Govology, and I'm joined here today with my friend, counterpart, fellow Cajun, Mike from RSM Federal. So, Mike, hello. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing good. Glad to see everybody in there. We're doing our best to make sure everybody gets in as quick as possible. And yeah, we're looking forward to today's episode.
All right. So if you haven't already connected with Michael Lejeune on LinkedIn, he's also a great wealth of information. I would recommend that you follow him. We're going to give you guys some links here today that you can go and do some things. And again, just to remind folks about the format of our episodes, we're recording these in a sequential manner. So like if you're starting with episode 1 and you're progressing as a government contractor, what are the typical issues that you might experience along that journey? So as we come into this episode number 3 now, last episode, we discussed clarity in episode 2. First episode was more of a coming soon episode. But really, this topic here, Mike, even though it's kind of like this could be for a relevant subject for a lot of beginners, there's also a lot of seasoned people that I've seen that have not done this thing. And because they haven't done this thing that we're going to talk about today, they spent a lot of money and a lot of time and they're still lost. So I'm talking about people 6 months, a year, 2 years, maybe even 5 years into like pursuing government market opportunities, and they still haven't figured it out. And what that particular thing is today is not doing the homework. So the issue is a lot of people have contacted me previously to say, hey, where do I even start out? So that's kind of the issue that we're going to cover today. And then one of the solutions for that issue is to really do the homework, right? To do the market research. And Mike, what I just said with regards to this being both a great topic for newbies, but also for seasoned contractors, have you seen that yourself as a person who works with a lot of businesses, coaches a lot of businesses, that you get there with a person that's been out there for even years and you realize that they haven't even gone and done this step 1, which I think is so critical and important?
No, I agree. We talk with companies that don't even have a company yet. So there are folks that reach out and say, hey, I've got an idea. I'm not sure what I want to sell to the government. I'm not sure who I should sell it to. I don't even have a company name yet. We talk with people anywhere from that stage to multi-billion-dollar corporations and everything in between. And it blows my mind how most of them have not done this research, or the last time they did the research was a decade ago. And the tools were completely different 10 years ago. And so now we can just see at such a granular level who's buying what you sell and how they're buying it and all those kind of things, that even if you entered the market 5 years ago, it's really good, maybe once a year or so, to get in and do some of that market research and just see if anything has changed. If there's a new organization buying what you sell, if there's new contract vehicles that you weren't aware of, or there's all kinds of different things, because it amazes me how people think, well, you're a government contracting expert, you should know everything there is to know about government. And rightfully so, I know a lot, but there's stuff that comes on our radar. As many years we've been in this, somebody will mention something and I'll say, you know what, I never heard of that. Let me go do a little bit of research. Right. Go, oh, okay, now I can connect the dots from this thing you just told me about to other stuff I know. But that just goes to show, even the people that have been in this market for 15, 20, 30 years, there's always something that surprises us or that's new. And so when you're in this business and you think you know it all, it's a really good time to step back and say, let me go look at the data. What does the data say? And I know you're going to talk about a couple of sources today. I highly recommend you don't just look at one source. You don't just go pull the data out of SAM.gov, or you don't just go to whatever bid matching tool is the flavor of the month these days and pull it from that. You pull from a couple of different sources and cross-reference the data, because you'll get a very different picture as you start to look at a little bit of everything. So
I'm glad that you mentioned the fact of the matter that this is also not a one-time thing. And that's why I'm going to really highly recommend that if your job is sales and business development for your organization who wants to get government contracts, that you master this skill for yourself, because you're going to use it so much. When you're getting started, you may use it to find relevant NAICS codes based on historical spend data where the government is buying. What are those important for? Well, to go and put the right NAICS codes in your SAM profile and maybe your capability statement. After that, you may be looking for who buys what you sell. And once you identify that, you might start to ask questions like, how are they buying what you sell? So I wanted to start out with this, Mike. And the first suggestion that I really have, and the overall solution in terms of like doing your homework, is to become a GovCon detective in a way. This is actually something Judy Bratt talked about a little bit in her webinar, which I'm going to share two webinars with you. One from Judy Bratt. We have both of these webinars on Govology. The other one's from your partner, Josh Frank. You know, he does a wonderful course on who buys what you sell. But I really like the way that Judy talked about this being a detective and using your resources to be able to help you tell a story. And if you think about it, I was just like contemplating this today too. It was like the Andy Griffith Show. You know, I think a lot of small businesses, and I'm kind of dating myself. I used to watch this as a kid. A lot of businesses are like Andy Griffith Show, right? Like you got the sheriff and you got Barney. They got to go and solve a mystery or a crime using their leads. They're asking questions, but they're also maybe, well, in those days, they probably didn't have data banks to leverage, right? But now you got police, they're using all of the resources at their disposal to basically put together the story, which includes interviewing leads, people that might lead to another lead, that might lead to another lead. And so as you start thinking about market research, there's some market research that you can do around the qualitative data, right? Which is the asking of good questions to the right people, and then just following those trails as it leads you into the situations. Of course, you need to know what are some of the good questions to ask. And then there's the quantitative data, which is now available on the internet. And there's a few ways you can do that. If you're Andy, you can go and learn it yourself and do it as part of your research. You can tell Barney to go and learn how to do it and then rely upon him. Or maybe if there's some outsourced person that's helping you to do research, just say, hey, give me a report on all of this information. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But Mike, talk about what you're seeing inside of that first step inside of the market research aspect.
I have a little bit different spin on it. I look at it as being a research ninja. I was a formerly licensed private investigator, so I'm a trained private investigator.
I did not know that.
I'm a trained analyst in the military. And so I look for little bits of data that I can start to put together to build a whole picture. Because a lot of times as an analyst, we get this one little piece of data and you'd have to figure out what was going on from that. You'd have to build a picture of what was really happening. And then you'd have to tell generals and whoever else, hey, this is what's going on. This is what the enemy is doing. And so it's very similar in business where I'll get one little piece of data and I've got to build a picture around it. And there's only so much data you can get from the system. Like you said, at some point, you've got to pick up the phone, get on email, start talking to people, and they're going to give you data that's not in the system, and that'll help further develop that picture. But what I find a lot in the market initially is people will say, well, who buys what I sell? And we'll go in or show them, hey, there's some videos, you can go online, however you want to do it. And initially, they're looking for who's spending the most money by agency, that sort of thing. And that's usually where most people stop. And for me, I'm always looking at, hey, not only do we want to find out who's spending, we want to find out how they're buying, right? So are they using GSA schedule? Are they using some other contract vehicle? But let me go back one step even further. How are they buying this as far as the NAICS code? Which NAICS code? Which keyword? Are they using PSC codes instead of NAICS codes? What's the most popular thing that's coming up? So we run the searches based on all of those criteria. Hey, let's come up with a dozen NAICS codes, a dozen keywords, some PSC codes. Let's look at our competition. How are they selling to the government? And you'll see very quickly when you start looking through this data, hey, the competition is selling $1 billion over the last 10 years, but there's only 3 NAICS codes they really sell in. So now I've eliminated that 7 of those NAICS codes I've been wasting my time on, and I can start to zero in. And again, you start to get clarity as you start to do the research to figure out, hey, this agency is buying this service under this NAICS code and this PSC code. And now I can drill in. Because I was talking to a guy yesterday who had spent, I think he said 6 months of time searching based on keyword. And I'm not going to say the keyword on here, but I said, given what you sell, it's a very uncommon keyword that they would use.
Right.
And he said, you're right. We never find it in the solicitation. But he had spent 6 months searching for opportunities and for who buys what he sells based on keyword. And the moment I said, look, here are the 3 NAICS codes, boom, boom, boom. We had all of this picture, and we did that in like 15 minutes. 15 minutes versus 6 months, because we knew how to search for that stuff to be able to say, look, this is really what you're looking for. These are the agencies. And then like for him, and I'm just giving you a live example here, for them, they're a WSB. And we said, well, out of all of these agencies buying, let's filter real quick and see who's spending the most in WSB money. And we did it. And guess what? All of the agencies shifted. Like the agency they thought was the number one wasn't. That dropped all the way down to like number 8. And agencies that weren't even on the radar rose to like the top 5 slots. And so we're like, so now you can stop wasting your time chasing these organizations and focus on these that are buying what you sell based on the right NAICS code, based on your status. So now you can drill in, and now it's time to look for contracting officers and other contacts. Sometimes you can be just chasing the data, and you're literally in this ocean of data and you have no idea what's going on, and it's overwhelming. And so you can surf that data for months and not find what you're looking for just because of inexperience. So that's why we're always talking about reach out to somebody. There's a lot of free sources. There's videos on YouTube. There's PTACs. There's all kind of organizations that can help point you in the right direction initially on that data. But that data homework is going to drive a lot of your strategy and how you approach organizations.
Absolutely, man. And just to basically kind of piggyback on a few things that you said there. First off, if this is your very first time, if you're a newbie and you don't know what a PSC code or a NAICS code is, let me break that down for you real quick.
Yeah.
So the NAICS code, North American Industry Classification System, is basically a 6-digit code that codifies the industry from which the government is buying from. Your product service codes are more specific to the actual product or service being purchased, and those are 4-digit codes. You can search on both of them once you learn how to basically dive into the data. These are a couple of the trainings that I'm going to share with you here. One, in fact, Josh's webinar, which we have on demand, goes very good and very deep into just basically diving into that data. And at different times, you might want to look at it in different ways. You know, and the example that you shared is that the keyword wasn't working for the person, but you might have another person in a different industry where, let's just say you're using training as a NAICS code. You know, I do training, and there are so many different types of training. It's just like if I'm searching by NAICS code, I might find a lot of irrelevant data. So now I try to get more specific to PSC, but even PSC might not be relevant to specifically what I'm trying to sell. And then now maybe I go back to a keyword search to find out, like, for example, if I'm selling procurement training to contracting officers, maybe I look for a specific keyword on procurement training. But it's like, you know, it gets to be sometimes hard. And that's where kind of the value of a really good expert can come in and help you. And we're going to talk to you. I want to give you 3 specific solutions to help you as you look to do your homework, as you look to do the market research, and basically make it happen for your company. But before we go into that, Mike, you just mentioned several good areas of things that people might want to look at. And one thing that I'd like to do inside of this episode here today is give people a list of things to look for or questions to ask. So there's 2 different things. And so if you're inside of the data, usually I start my research in the data, in the spend, and find out what I can find then, because the gaps in what I don't find also gives me good questions then to go and ask the people that I'm going to be talking to. So first, let's talk about who are the people. Like if you were this GovCon investigator or private investigator or whatever, if you want to play the role game like that.
Yeah.
But if you were actually going to do this and you were going to go and ask some folks, because I think a lot of people kind of get too stuck on the contracting officer and everybody's going there. And that's definitely a person that can help answer some questions for you. But there are some other people beyond that contracting officer. So what do you think? You got a few other leads in there that they can go?
Yeah. One of the most obvious ones for folks like us is the small business office. There's a small business rep They come by a half a dozen different names and titles and different things like that. But everywhere you're going to call on has a small business rep of some sort. And that's one of the first sources there. Number one, they're supposed to be your advocate, right? So that you've got that. And they're usually very easy to reach in the grand scheme of things. Not all of them, but hey, most of them are fairly easy to reach. And they're going to have knowledge of the organization, how it buys what you sell, those sort of things. They should be able to point you into the right direction. The other thing is, everywhere I've ever been, whether it's a military base, another type of installation, or the Pentagon, wherever it is, they all have program and project managers.
Yes.
They all have these people. And these people are often key influencers in the whole process of creating a solicitation and going to the contracting officer, the contracting officer bidding and all that kind of stuff. They play a key role in all of this type of stuff. And so they are probably the hardest person to locate because they're not going to be in solicitations or anything like that. However, one of the biggest tools that I use to find these people is LinkedIn. If you go in LinkedIn and you start typing in a specific program or whatever it may be, and type in just the program Fort Hood or whatever it is, you're probably going to find titles that pop up and there's a list of people. So now you can scroll through those and go, this is the program manager of this project here. And then you might be able to find them on a website. You can also Google them and do things like that. But LinkedIn is a powerful tool for digging in and finding these program and project managers. It's a powerful tool for finding the small business reps. Sometimes I can't find it through just a simple search, but I'll go on LinkedIn, I'll type small business rep for whatever. And next thing I know, there's a list of some people. I start scrolling through, pick them, connect with them, and start there. So it's not that hard to find these people, but you can go layers deeper than just the contracting officer. Another cool thing to do is a lot of times you're thinking about one contracting officer, but almost every solicitation that I see has two contracting officers, sometimes three names on there. So you can hop into sam.gov and type in that person's email or whatever, go look at, again, if we're going to pick on the Army for a moment, I always pick on that because I was Army. We go in there, we start looking, we find a solicitation from the contracting officer, we know their name, and guess what? There's another one right next to it. So now we've got multiple names that we're dealing with, and now we can start to utilize that and start to ask those people questions. So those are the ones that I look at. Is there additional contracting officers, the small business office, as well as any PMs of any kind? Those are the people I'm looking for typically.
Yeah, man. And I think I got to tell you, man, it's like I could have swore I probably telepathy just some information over there, because this is actually what I was going to say too, with regards to, and we didn't practice this beforehand,
No.
but these influencers, who influences the demand? I always talk about this. It's not the contracting officer that influences the demand. The contracting officer simply processes the demand. I was talking to a really good friend of mine who's got a lot of big businesses, and you can actually reverse this model a little bit, where one path is that you can kind of go get registered at SAM, set up your prospecting, do the capability statement, do the whole 9 yards. But you could flip this around, even before you registered at SAM, you don't need to be registered at SAM to start really just doing some research and asking some questions of folks to even see if this market is something that you have an opportunity to sell into, or if maybe you find out, well, man, I've got to go 5 layers deep just to sell that. It's I got to get into a GSA schedule, and then on the GSA, I got to get into a BPA. It's do you really want to go there?
Yeah, it's way down the rabbit hole at that point.
Pricing. So I really believe that so many people could save so much time and money by doing this step first. And as you reach out to those folks, and Mike just also mentioned something that I was going to mention, if you don't already know how to use LinkedIn's search filters, just go do a YouTube, say how to use LinkedIn's people search filter, right?
It's not hard.
You can put in the agency, you can see everybody that's inside of that agency, and then start to look at the roles and the titles of those folks, and think about hey, who might be somebody that could be a lead, right? Go back to your investigator hat, right? Who could be a lead? And that might not necessarily be the person initially that I need to talk to, but if it's not, say, I'm trying to get some facts, because nobody can fault a business for just trying to get some information. I'm just trying.
And that's right. That's a big thing, because I think we're so scared that you can't talk to the government. You can't talk to them. And that's total garbage. You can talk to them. Even if something is in acquisition, you can call and ask a question. Just don't ask about the thing in acquisition. Hey, I'm not calling about what's in acquisition. I'm calling about how you buy this thing.
Right.
You just happen to have found them that way. But you mentioned influencers. Sometimes it's the people that I talked about, the PMs, the small business rep, those people. But sometimes it's other grassroots level people. Yeah. And you may think, well, hey, there's no way I'm ever going to find that guy. But I guarantee if you go in LinkedIn and let's say you sell oil or tires or something like that, go and search LinkedIn for people that are in the motor pool,
right?
Things like that, or that deal with fleets and vehicles. You'll find chief mechanics and all these different people. And like you said, even if they can't help you directly, they can say, well, hey, every time I put in an order for 1,000 gallons of oil, I always go to Sue Smith over at whatever. Oh, can you connect me with Sue? There's all kinds of different things. And as an analyst or an investigator, I'm constantly looking for one more little piece of the puzzle. That's all I'm looking for. I'm constantly like, hey, if I can find one more piece of the puzzle, that's going to get me that much closer to the answer I'm looking for. Here's another thing that people miss in their research. Let's assume that you're just starting out and you have no idea where to start. They're like, man, I don't know what the keywords are. I don't know what the NAICS codes are. I don't know any of this stuff. But do you know any of your competitors? If you know anybody, even if they're larger than you, they're like, hey, if I was to look at a business, I would say this organization is probably the most similar to ours. Okay, well, let's go pull the data for them. Because if we go pull the data for them, we'll find all of their NAICS codes. We'll find all of their clients. We'll find all of that data. And then we can use that to reverse engineer our process to go and do our searching. And so a lot of times that's what I'll do. I'll say, hey, give me 2 or 3 competitors that you know that are kind of similar to you, maybe a bit bigger. And let's just see who they're selling to. Let's go look at their SAM profile. What's in their SAM profile? What types of things are they winning? Because maybe you think, hey, they're a service-disabled veteran-owned company. That's why they're winning all this money. And then we find out, that's not how they're winning the money. They're winning it a different way. So it's just a matter of, if you know a little bit of information, as little as who your competitor is, you can reverse engineer the process and figure out all these other pieces.
Absolutely, man. And one of the other things that I was going to recommend was this, like, when you get that opportunity to go in and have a conversation with an influencer, don't go in with the assumption that you've got the best thing since sliced bread. Say,
That's
hey,
right.
I believe that we can really help you out based upon the research that we've already done. But I'd like to ask a few more questions to just fill it out, or really see what you guys are seeing. First of all, if I'm calling into an agency and I know that they buy what I sell, first of all, if I haven't been able to identify perhaps where they buy what I sell, is it in the open market? Is it in a GSA schedules? Is it in a independent contract vehicle that they recompete every 5 years? I'm going to want to know that, right? Then I'm going to start to ask them some other questions about that acquisition. What are the challenges that they perhaps see inside of that? And maybe even find out where the gaps are, because I got to say, this world has plenty of problems. And I see those problems for an entrepreneur as opportunities. And there's a lot of gaps that still exist out there. And sometimes you don't even need to go after that big, huge project that this one contractor has already got. Maybe you can find the gaps. This is where I'm seeing that we can really add some value, either directly, or you might find that, hey, my game is to go and work with that prime and sell them on where we add value to them and fill in gaps that's being left open right now, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of baby steps in the beginning. And so the baby steps are doing the homework, filling in those gaps, just getting some wins. And after you've gotten some of those wins, then you can really start to accelerate. But it's these foundational steps of knowing some of this data. So you're building a strategic plan that is focused in the right areas, instead of just, hey, we're going to sell to the government. The government buys what we sell, and we're just going to attack this thing full bore with no real direction. And so you build a really good, strong strategic plan. You get a little bit of traction, fill in those gaps. And next thing you know, you become a preferred vendor and they want to work with you and do more things with you. And it just makes it easier. You start to influence acquisitions and things because you're around the customer and embedded in their organization. And you're hearing things. You got people on site, they're hearing things about problems and they're bringing those problems to you and you're working on those problems. But it all starts with gathering the right data, creating a really good plan, and doing your homework up front so that, again, you don't waste 6, 8, 10, 12 months. Like the guy I was saying earlier, 6 solid months of banging his head on the wall. And I asked him, I said, you've been at this 6 months. How many opportunities have you found? 3. 3 opportunities in 6 months. He chased all 3 of them and lost 2 of them. He's still waiting to hear on the 3rd one. But you haven't done your homework. You're really just, it's like they put on a blindfold and just started swinging a bat at a pinata, you know? Like that's kind of how they are. But they've only found like 3 pinatas to go after.
Right. And, you know, unfortunately, that a lot of people think that that's really the only way. You kind of just need to jump in and kind of stumble your way forward. And that's how it used to be back before we had this data visible to us. You talk to the old school guys, they'd be like, man, just had to like, that's one pathway, but that pathway is very long and expensive, and it doesn't have to be that way anymore, right?
Yeah. This data wasn't there when you and I started out 20 years ago. If it was in any way, shape, or form, we didn't know how to get it.
Right.
And so, you know, I've been working with the data systems for about a little over a decade-ish. And, you know, they've evolved over time. SAM.gov, when it's working, is really, really good. And there's a lot of people on here that would testify that, hey, right now, there's days it's just a dumpster fire. Like you get into SAM.gov and you're like, man, this thing doesn't work at all. Every time I hit a button, it breaks. It just happens. So they're going through the motions. They're going to get it right. And I have faith that eventually they'll get it right. I just don't know when. So that's why I always recommend, hey, have some backup systems. I jump into USA Spending all the time because it's free. And it's really good. It has a really nice user interface. It's really simple to search stuff. And again, you don't need every ounce of data initially. You just need some data to make some good decisions. And so whether it's USA Spending, SAM.gov, there's a lot of different ways you can get this data initially to just get started and point yourself in the right direction.
Well, I'd like to basically leave with a bit of a recap on some of the things that we talked about, but there's 3 specific things that I would like to leave everyone here with so that if you do want to go and do your homework, you can get it done. Even within the 3 things that I'm going to mention, I'm going to talk about an issue within the issue, So if option 1 doesn't work out for you, you've got options 2 and 3, because I really want us to be able to enable you to get this homework done. So let's talk about those 3. And then Mike, I'll have you come in and chime in on what you feel inside of that I might have missed. But so option number 1 is to look to your G-Fund Mastermind. Now, I kind of made up this term G-Fund Mastermind. I really think that I love the mastermind principle. The G-Fund Mastermind is comprised of all of the government funded resource partners that can help you out. There's a lot of money that's being given to agencies like Small Business Development Centers, SCORE, Women's Business Center, Veterans Business Center. Those resources are more for like general business counseling and kind of business planning stuff. So if you're trying to create a business plan, those resources are great help inside of that. Then you have another slew of resources. You got PTACs out there, Procurement Technical Assistance Centers. These folks are a great resource to help people do some market research. But, here's an issue within that is that you might not have access to a PTAC in your area. I wish there was PTACs in every area, and there's PTACs in most areas, but what I found is that there's not coverage in every area. And in some areas, some PTACs have a 2-year rule. Most don't, but some say, hey, we're really limited on staff, and we're going to ask that you be in business for 2 years, that you have a propensity to succeed before we're going to be able to help you out. So some people just may not have access to their counselor. Some people might have a PTAC where maybe there's a counselor that just doesn't have that skill set yet. I know from my experience, and I'll just share my experience, and every PTAC is different. There's wonderful counselors all around the United States. and it's likely that you can get some help there. But when I was a PTAC counselor, I was like one of the only people that really was the data geek that loved to dive in and do the market research. But I was not a GSA guru. It's like if you were coming to me for GSA schedule and helping you put together a proposal, I wasn't that guy. I wasn't a DCAA compliant accounting systems guy, right? But the cool thing about it is that I had other partners inside of my PTAC that, like, if you needed GSA, I could send you there. Unfortunately, if you needed to know how to set up a DCAA compliant accounting system, I didn't really have a resource for you. We didn't really have that skill set in-house. So that's where I would need to kind of try to refer you out or have you say, hey, look to some other experts, which is what we're going to talk about in solution number 3. So that's what you might find. So, but definitely check in with your local PTAC. If you're not familiar with what a PTAC is, it's a grant-funded organization from the Department of Defense. They have PTACs all across the nation. And if you need one, they're there to help you out. Other folks that also do some specialized support, Minority Business Development Agency. Google them if you're a minority-owned business. They also do a little bit of both sides. They kind of do some business foundations, but they also have some things that they do for federal contracting. And then also there's a specialized program for people who wants to do business with the Department of Transportation called the DOT Small Business Transportation Resource Centers. All of those folks, I highly recommend go and find out what they can offer you for your business, because everybody has different people with different skill sets and different resources that they may be able to help you get. I've seen some of these resources before pay for folks' legal expenses to go out and consult with an attorney. So you never know what you're going to get when you get out there, but you definitely have to make an effort to get out there and meet those folks. The second step, if for some reason that first option is not working for you, is you can get some training and then do it yourself. So we have a couple of good trainings on Govology. I'll recommend, if you want to find them, just simply go to govology.com, go to the on-demand section, and you can search these keywords. Federal data diving, how to go for the gold. But if you just put federal data diving, you'll find the course. That's the course by Judy Bratt, who talks about this whole detective approach. And I really like the way she kind of uses the detective thing, because I also thought about that similarly, as like you try to piece together this puzzle, and I can even picture little strings on the wall leading to pictures and people. Yeah. Josh Frank does a really good job. And actually, at the end of Judy's webinar, she leads into recommending Josh's webinar on Who Buys What You Sell. You can go into learn how to set up these data reports for yourself inside of the system. What's the issue you might run into there? You might get the training and still be a little bit having some struggles doing it for yourself for the first time. So if you need some additional help, that's where the third step comes in, and that's to leverage an expert that can either set up a meeting, like a Zoom call, and basically hold your hand and walk you through together, do it with you, or they can just really completely do it for you. The issues inside of that is that, yep, you're going to have to make an investment, but I encourage you to make an investment. But the bigger issue inside of this, Mike, and I think that we see this a lot of times, is that people are willing to invest, but sometimes they invest with the wrong people. And we see people getting like scammed all the time, getting ripped off all the time. So the bigger issue here becomes, it's like, really, how do you find good SMEs in the government marketplace, and how do you avoid the bad ones? And a quick story here. There's so many people that basically can just set up shop and claim to be a GovCon expert. Right. I actually, when I was a PTAC counselor, had a counseling session, first counseling session with this business. And the guy brought his son, and I showed them how to basically navigate USAspending.gov. Next thing I know, the dude's an expert in basically selling the service. Yeah, and I'm sure that probably because he didn't have a lot of practice, he might not have been that effective at it. So the worst thing that I've seen a business can do is put money down a drain and not really get served well. So I have a few resources, where to find good experts. I can personally vouch for. Mike, you guys have a great resource there. You've got some of the best coaches in the country there at RSM Federal. Mike, if you can put a link in the platform to where some of those folks are, I would highly recommend, personally vouch for any of those folks that's on RSM's team. Any faculty member on Govology. So this is something that not a lot of people knows about Govology, but we don't just get anybody to come in here and do training. I go through a personal vetting process. I go through a personal interview process, because if a person takes a training and they need to reach out to this expert for help, I want to make sure that not only they're a good trainer, but they're also a really good person that's going to take care of people out there. And we never ask for any referral fees or anything. I just want to get people to good people. We also have a Govology Connect directory. At the time that we're recording this, it's currently being revamped. But if you go to the Govology website and go under the resources area and look for trusted experts, that's where we're going to have some folks, again, vetted set of resources. I primarily set that up, Mike, because back in the day when I was a PTAC counselor and they had that instance where the person came in to get some help with a compliant accounting system or something that I couldn't help them out with, I fell short on resources and I didn't really sometimes know where to send people. And that's why I wanted to create that directory. And if none of that works, just send us an email at support@govology.com. I'd be happy to help you connect with somebody that can help you inside of this. Mike, what are you seeing in this, and just closing out the session and basically what I said? And if you have anything that I left out, maybe you could share that as we close.
I think you hit everything. The one thing I'll say is definitely do your own due diligence when you're working with folks. There's a lot of people out there, like you mentioned. And the one thing about once you choose somebody, you need to follow their advice. That's one of the things. It really doesn't matter who you choose. If you don't follow their advice or you don't listen to what they're trying to tell you, if you're trying to force the round peg in the square hole and they're telling you, no, don't do that, you need to listen to it, because I do think our team is some of the best people in the world that do this. And every now and then I'll get a call from one of the coaches or one of our clients and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, that, or the other. And I'm like, well, we've laid out the plan for you. And you said, I don't want to do that. I want to do it the hard way. And sometimes, hey, the hard way may be the way you want to do it. But if we just back up and slow down, we'll get this right. And so I do see that quite often, where people are in such a rush to get it done and win the first contract that they don't want to slow down and take the right steps. And so there's a lot of really good people in the market that don't work with us. And I'll hear bad things and I'll say, look, what did they tell you? They gave you the right advice. I don't know why you didn't want to take it. Right. And so again, that's just kind of my take on what I've seen in the market, is sometimes a company has an unwillingness to follow the steps. And so I just highly encourage you, regardless of who you work with, whether it's a PTAC, a consultant, anybody out there, they're giving you advice based on experience. And so really take that advice under advisement and look at, hey, how do we apply this? Maybe we can't apply everything, but they're not just telling you that because they want you to go slow or they want you to fail. That's not why. They're telling you that stuff to give you the greatest chance of success. And so that's my one big piece of advice. When you hire somebody, or even if you're going for free advice, really listen to what the people are saying about what you're selling. And by the way, I probably tell about 5 to 10% of the people I talk to that they shouldn't pursue the market. Really pay attention to that when you hear it. Because I was talking to a guy yesterday and I'm like, man, I just started looking through the people you're doing business with and the articles on your company. You guys are crushing it. Why in the world would you want to get into government contracting when you're signing deals every single day with like Fortune 100 companies this guy is working with? And I'm like, and now you're going to throttle down the speed of the company. He's like, well, I'm thinking I should diversify. Like, just grow your commercial business. Just take it on steroids. Don't get into this market. And so I'm one of the first people to tell you, hey, this is the wrong market for you. Here's why it's the wrong market for you. Just because your best friend's cousin's out of work, dog walker said, hey, you should get into government, doesn't mean it's the right place for you. And if you're looking at the data and you've got a really good consultant or PTAC counsel, whatever it is, they're going to be straight up with you and tell you, yes, no, go left, go right, slow down, speed up, and give you some really good direction. So that's probably a little more long-winded than I should have there, Carol, but I think it's a good episode for people to kind of wrap their head around this data process in the first few steps. So,
no, I love that. And that's a perfect close, just what you said. Right? Just going in there, doing that research. And if the research says that you shouldn't do it right now, let that just speak to you and don't do it right now, right?
Yeah. Don't force it.
Don't pull away resources that are working to something that you don't know will work, right?
Yeah.
You might hire a new person to go and do some development. And that was a great point that you made it in closing, man.
And I always tell people, no doesn't mean never.
Right.
No just may mean maybe it's not the right time.
Right.
And maybe 6 months from now, a year from now. But no doesn't mean you can't ever do it. It just means, hey, I probably wouldn't do that given these 4 things or whatever it may be. So,
and the research might tell you no too, because the research might say, hey, the contract vehicle you need to position with has just been recompeted and awarded, and it's not coming up for another 5 years.
Yeah.
So
call me back in 4 years and we'll dig in. Yeah.
Unless you want to be a subcontractor, then we can talk. So
there you go.
Well, great, Mike. So, hey, thank you so much for this episode. I'm hoping that the folks who are listening to this got a lot out of it and got some actionable items that they can take away with and implement in their business. So we're going to go ahead and close. And again, thanks for watching or listening, and we'll see you again on the next episode. So now we'll go to questions. So, Mike, let's roll right into questions. I know we're kind of running up on the top of the hour, and I want to get to as many as we can. But so we had a few submissions to the issues list. When I wanted to bring it up on here, because this could be relevant to some people out there, it's the middleman strategy. So we had an issue basically, and they wanted to know, how do I basically bid as a middleman under my car dealership, right? And so when I look at this, and if you're here, feel free to raise your hand and you can come on and talk with us and give us some additional insights on this. But essentially, you got a person who basically, they have a dealership, they sell used cars, but they maybe see some opportunities to sell new cars. How does all of that work? Let me kind of start by saying this. As a distributor, all distributors need to really understand what's called the non-manufacturing rule. And also, so we have some courses on the Govology website. If you go to our on-demand area and just put in the search word, non-manufacturer, you can spell all that together. So essentially, this is a weird term. Like, what is a non-manufacturer? Well, basically, it's not a manufacturer. So, but the government, when they buy things, they will buy things under a manufacturer's NAICS code typically. So that's actually one clue too. That's another issue that I didn't even plan to talk about. But a lot of people, when they set up their NAICS codes, they put these wholesale trade NAICS codes, but they don't put the manufacturing NAICS codes. But primarily, government buys through manufacturing NAICS codes, these commodities. You can put those on your profile, the manufacturing NAICS codes, even though you are considered to be a non-manufacturer. As a small business, if there's a set aside, there are some stiff rules that revolve around this non-manufacturing rule. So if you're a distributor, the first thing I would say, take a course on the non-manufacturer rule. Talk to your coach, your counselor, whoever you're working with to help bring you up to speed on that. Go and talk to a good GovCon attorney to say, hey, here are the specifics of my business, because a lot of attorneys that are very well versed, and we have a few that we could send you to. Of course, we don't get referral fees for any of them, but just good people doing good things. If you need to go and talk to an attorney and understand that, some of the training that's on our website was done by some of the best attorneys in the GovCon space. So you can go and take a look at that. But essentially, there's a lot of rules around if you're reselling a manufactured product. I can't go into all of them here, but it gets a bit sticky and it gets a bit overwhelming. And that's why you're going to really want to know these rules. One of the big things that a distributor is going to run into as a non-manufacturer is that the government wants you to take ownership or possession of that property. So with the car dealer, how do you do that, right? If you're not taking possession physically of a car and on selling it through to the government, are you going to take ownership of that? And what does that mean? Do you have to pay taxes? I don't know. Can you take ownership by covering the shipping and freight until it gets to the car? But just this whole episode, what Mike and I talked about is really the first place to start to do that data research and say, what is the government buying? Which agency buys cars the most? I can tell you, GSA is probably the biggest buyer of cars because they run the fleet, right? GSA has a lot of fleet vehicles, but they're not the only people who buy cars. So start that research there. And then start the detective work. Ask about where are they buying these cars? Are they going direct to the manufacturer? Do they go direct to the local dealerships, et cetera, et cetera? then you can start to put together a picture of how you may go in and enter, or may say, like, forget about it. One of the things I will say is there's people, I've shared this with you before, Mike, but I think that there's like a lot of people that have a lot of names. And if I had a name, I'd probably call myself the guinea pig of the government marketplace, because I've put myself into situations to sell direct to the government many times. I was actually selling it as a distributor at one point in time. And what I found was that the margins that I were getting was so low. It's like, you can't look at the margin and say, hey, that's my profit. No, it's not your profit. That margin that you're getting on the difference you pay to your manufacturer and sell it to the government for, you got to account for all of your time and cost to do all the paperwork, to make sure that you're taking accountability to get that item there, to get the invoice process. And by the end of all of that, man, it might not even be worth it.
Yeah.
An alternate solution that you guys might want to think about and this is maybe getting a little bit creative, but this suggestion can also apply to the car guy as well as other dealers. But I've suggested before, think about maybe just being a manufacturer's rep, or in this situation, maybe just a dealer's rep, where, hey, if you know how to find and sell cars to the government, ultimately, at the end of the day, you're working for a commission. Let the dealer take care of all of the paperwork and let them have the accountability of delivering it to the government. And at the end of the day, you'll still get a margin out of that. Anyway, Mike, do you have any thoughts on that in particular?
Yeah, the whole concept of being a reseller, and when you are reselling somebody else's product, one of the things that I always look at is how big is that person who's supplying it? And do you have a relationship with them? So I actually have a client of ours that sells like medical gas and things like that. And their only supplier is a company. If I said the name, it's a household name, and they didn't have a relationship with them. And so what they found was, and we found doing the data, was their manufacturer was selling direct to the government and often competing against them on contracts. And part of that is just because they did not have a good relationship with the manufacturer and their regional sales reps. And so this company happened to be an SDVOSB. So I said, look, you've got this leverage that you can use. You need to set up a meeting with all 19 of their regional sales directors and say, look, this can be guided towards our relationship under the SDVOSB if you guys would just leverage it. So sometimes, even though you're a reseller, you have leverage that the manufacturer doesn't have, and you need to use that to position the relationship with the buyers. Because guess what? That's not the only manufacturer that makes medical gas. There's others in the market. So it's not just you against your manufacturer. Let's team up and let's go beat the other guys. But you have to work with them. So getting to know the regional reps within your manufacturer is sometimes really important, because otherwise they don't know you exist. And again, you wind up competing head to head with them. And that's a tough situation, because now you're competing on price with the same company that's competing on price. And there goes your margins and all that type of stuff. So you just have to be aware of the landscape when you're trying to compete on that. When somebody comes to me and says something about like cars or something like this, I'm like, that's one of those situations where out of the gate, I would say, there's a good chance I'm going to tell you not to pursue this. It's such an odd thing that the government does. Yes, they do buy. They probably have very established relationships. They probably don't buy every single week or every single month. And I'm not saying you can't break into it, but it's probably going to take us a year to really break into that market. But how many cars, GM, Ford, Chevy, whatever, how many of those cars could you sell to the commercial market if you put even a tenth of that energy into it? Mm-hmm. So sometimes that's a really great example to say, look, a year from now, we could be selling to the government, or you could just not waste your time on this and go do this other thing. It really just, it depends. Let's go see what the data says. We'll go from there. But that's my take on that one.
Yeah, I want to go a little bit deeper in this, and I know we have some questions coming in. And I want to share a quick relevant story based also off of what you just said, and then also based upon what we just recorded with this episode on market research and how that data pays off. So, short story, I was invited to be an equity partner from a contractor who was doing really well. They were a minority-owned business, construction firm. then they happened to get this reseller license to be an authorized reseller of a certain brand of equipment. I won't mention who it is. So they're like, hey, this is like the golden ticket. Like they only approve so many people to do this kind of authorized resellers. And I'm like, they wanted to offer me an equity position. And I'm like, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go do some research and I'll let you know. So I did my research. And what I found was that the top seller of that equipment was positioned on GSA schedules, which means that we would have had to really get onto GSA schedules to even really be competitive. But the price that they were offering up on the GSA schedules was like 10 to 15% lower than the price that this small firm was getting it from this company for. And so I'm like, man, you would have a better opportunity buying from that company if they could give it to you at their GSA rates, than this pricing that you're getting from the company. Well, even though you're a minority owned business, we'd never be competitive. And all things aside, even though the government does a lot to support minority owned businesses and small disadvantaged businesses, they do make their goals. And once they've met their goals and they're looking at this price differential of paying like 15% higher, where it's like, hey, my goals are met, do I want to pay 15% more to use this business? That's a judgment call for the contracting officer. And a lot of time they'll take the lower priced option. So at the end of the day, you could see how that doing the market research saved like a ton of time and effort. If I wouldn't have done that, we would have gone and registered. We would have probably we would have seen that there was some buying maybe on GSA happening, or somebody would have said, you need to get there. We've gone through that process, probably would have got kicked off of GSA schedules because 52% of small businesses get kicked off after the first couple of years with no sales. Yeah. And gosh, that's such a time. How much time and cost do you think that is?
On average right now, it takes a company between 9 and 15 months to get a GSA schedule. And they're also going to spend probably $6,500 to $10,000 on a consultant to help them. The most I've seen out in the market is a guy that spent 30 grand to get his GSA schedule, 6 months to put together the packet, and then he waits almost 2 years to get the schedule, right? So, I mean, that's how far away a GSA schedule could be, which, by the way, I don't know, most people don't know this little trick. You can actually get your product or service added to someone else's GSA schedule in a couple of weeks with just an eMod that you could do, and you could operate with your partner that way if you really need access to a GSA schedule, and you can operate that way for a long period of time while you're getting your schedule. So that's a trick that wasn't even on here today, is adding yourself to somebody else's GSA schedule. But when it comes to that, I think pricing is one of those issues where if you don't understand the pricing side of it, you're going to set yourself up for a lot of trouble as well. I talked to a client a couple of months ago, and she was saying, we keep getting beaten on price. And I said, okay, well, talk to me about your price. And I'm not a pricing expert, but she was like, well, our pricing is about 40% more than most people. And there's all kind of reasons she's trying to justify it. And I said, why is your price so much more? She's like, well, we've got all this overhead we got to cover. Well, that's not their problem. It's not the government's problem that instead of choosing to work from your homes or choose a reasonable office space, you chose the 55th floor in this one premier building in this one space where like it's all like mahogany and marble floor. Like, and it cost you crazy amount of money because you wanted that space. Now you're trying to pass that on to the government. The government's saying, no way. No, we're not buying it. And so like sometimes when you just start looking at the pricing, you'll realize, oh, there's no way we can be competitive. So even if we know who buys our stuff, we know how they buy it, if you can't be competitive, you're going to be spinning your wheels. And so I know a lot of this sounds negative, but it's just the cautionary tales over decades of you and I listening to these examples and going, man, this person shouldn't be a government contractor. Right. Or, hey, if you're going to be a government contractor, you need to look at it from this perspective. I'll throw one more pricing one out there. I had somebody the other day come to me and say, hey, Mike, have you ever heard of SCA? And I was like, yeah, I'm familiar with SCA and the SCA rates and things like that. We won't go into SCA today.
So list out what that acronym means for
So
the
what is it?
potential
It's
newbies.
gosh,
Talking Service Contract Act.
yeah, service contract. And so basically the government, for every position and for contracts that are over a certain amount of dollars, they require you to pay all of these extra things for like health and welfare and stuff.
Right.
And so you may have
prevailing wage
a
rates.
contract where you're paying a construction worker $18 an hour in wages, but then you're also required to pay them another $4.60 per hour in health and welfare. And so a lot of people don't know about SCA. They don't know it applies across the board, and they don't know how to do the pricing. And so now you've bid your rates at $19 an hour or whatever, and you didn't think about that extra $4.60. But that's just that one. I was doing some research, like in St. Louis, there was one rate, it was like $19.50 an hour for the person. It was 19 something an hour for the health and welfare. It was $8 and something an hour for some other category. Next thing you know, it's like $35, $40 an hour. And this guy had bid 25 thinking he had margin in it. And it's like, no. And so you've really got to understand your pricing and how it works and all the little rules in order to make sure you are competitive. And you're meeting the Department of Labor's SCA mandates on this type of stuff. And so yeah, there's all kinds of things that could trip you up. So,
while you're on that topic, I think that actually we can do a whole new episode. Because you've got the Service Contract Act for service firms, and then you've got Davis-Bacon for construction firms. And I've seen it all too often throughout the years when people are not taking those into account, both at the prime level, but also if you're not flowing down those rates to your subcontractors and making them aware that they have to pay those rates, and those rates don't get paid, guess what? The government's coming after you, and you're going to make up the difference, and that's not going to be a good situation to be in. So, all right. Well, hey, another issue that we had submitted to the Coffee and Issues was the WSB website sucks. And I think that they're talking about the certification website. And I know, this is a new process, a new program with the SBA. They rolled out this WOSB. Previously, it was just self-certification, or you could go through a third-party certifier. But right now, apparently, they're having some issues with the WOSB website. And I know that the person who basically submitted this, they've kind of gone through several levels, which I would have recommended. For example, check with your Peak Tech counselor, see if they have any insight. Go and talk to your local SBA office, your business opportunity specialist at the local SBA office, if you can get some insights there. If they can't help you, maybe you ask, hey, is there somebody in DC that runs this program that can help me out? I'm having this issue. And, if you've exhausted all your options and you've gone all the way up the chain, and I wouldn't suggest this as your first resource, but as the last, but it's an effective one, is if you contact your congressional office. I know that when I worked at the SBA, if we had a congressional inquiry come in, it was just like, stop the press, and let's get this answered. And I think that this congressman, congresswoman, they are out there.
And I'll tell you, when it comes to your congressional reps, this is just a quick side note here on that. A lot of those people, especially the folks that are in the House, right? Not necessarily the Senate, but in the House, those people make their rounds in their districts. And regardless of what city you live in, make sure that you follow either the city like Facebook page or LinkedIn or whatever it is. You'll get notified that, or whoever is in your district, follow their pages, and you'll find when they have office hours that are close to you. I just met with one of our rep, Rodney Davis, a couple of weeks ago. I saw that he had office hours, and so I wanted to go talk to him about an issue. And he was like, well, you don't really want us getting involved. And I'm like, no, sir, I do want you getting involved in this issue. You may not want to get involved, but I want you involved. And so I was able to sit with him for, 10, 15 minutes and talk about the issue. And so you can do that in your area when you have an issue that you want them to get involved in. Those are your reps that you vote for. And even if you don't vote for them, those are people that wind up getting elected. So I did tell them, hey, I did vote for you, and I need you to listen. And here's my issue. And so you can go and bend their ear. And a lot of times they have an aide or two with them. And those people are folks that you can communicate with as well. So even if you can't get a meeting with them next time, you can communicate with their reps or their aides And that's another way you can help leverage that side of things by just being aware when they have office hours, and go and meet them when you don't have an issue. And then when you have an issue, hey, I met you a couple months ago, whatever city, and we talked about this, I'd really appreciate some help. Can you point me in the right direction? But make use of those office hours to get to know who those reps are.
Absolutely. And also the aides are very effective when they're reaching out to an agency they're reaching out on behalf of that office, and it gets attention.
That's
right. The thing that I would really highly recommend though, is make sure you have the facts, and make sure hey, there's a true kind of messed up situation that needs to get resolved. Here's what I've done. Here's what I've tried. I'm out of options, So when you're out of options, that's like a last resort.
Yep.
But it's an effective one. I can say that because I've used it as well, Mike.
Yep. Good stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. I think this was a great session. Thank you all for the folks that are still hanging out with us today. It looks like we have 15 participants still in the room, but we're going to go ahead and close out. And again, if you're looking for this episode online, the best way to find it, it'll take us maybe a week to get it processed, edited, and put it online. But again, govology.com/issues is where you can find past issues. And also, again, go and submit an issue for a future episode, or register to come on with us next time. So thanks again, Mike, and thank you all for being with us, and we'll see you next week.
See you next time, everybody.
All right.
Have a great week.
Bye-bye.